The sky was dark, but not because of night. It was midday, yet the sun had vanished behind a thick curtain of shadow. The source of the darkness loomed above Earth, a fleet of alien ships so massive they blocked out the light. They were here. The Vorthok had arrived. Commander Zernik stood on the bridge of his flagship, gazing down at the blue planet below with cold indifference. To him, Earth was just another world to conquer, another civilization to crush underfoot. His people had done this countless times before. This invasion would be no different. Or so, he thought. Back on Earth, panic erupted as news of the alien arrival spread like wildfire. People ran through streets, screaming and crying, unsure of what to do or where to go. Governments scrambled to respond, calling emergency meetings and deploying every available soldier and weapon. But deep down, everyone knew the truth. Humanity was outmatched. The Vorthok's technology was centuries ahead of anything humans possessed. Their ships were sleek and impenetrable, gliding effortlessly through the atmosphere while Earth's jets struggled to even approach them. In Washington, D.C., leaders gathered in a dimly lit war room. Screens displayed live footage of the alien ships hovering over major cities. Explosions lit up the horizon as desperate attempts to fight back ended in failure. Every missile fired bounced harmlessly off their energy shields. Every jet that tried to engage was vaporized in an instant. The situation was dire, and morale was crumbling. "We need options," shouted General Harper, slamming his fist on the table. "We can't just sit here and let them destroy us." But no one had an answer. No one except for one man who wasn't even supposed to be there. Colonel Elias Kane walked into the room unnoticed at first. He was dressed in an old, faded military uniform that looked decades out of date. His boots were scuffed, and his face bore the lines of someone who had seen too much. Yet there was something about him, an aura of quiet confidence, that made heads turn when he finally spoke. "I'll handle it," he said simply. The room fell silent. Dozens of eyes turned to stare at him, some curious, others skeptical. One officer laughed nervously. "Handle what?" "You're one guy against an entire alien armada." Elias didn't flinch. He stepped forward, placing both hands on the table. "I'm not saying I'll win," he replied calmly. "I'm saying I'll buy you time." General Harper frowned. "Time for what?" "We don't have reinforcements coming. We don't have a secret weapon. What exactly are you planning to do?" Elias met the general's gaze without hesitation. "You don't need to know. All you need to understand is this. If you want any chance at survival, you'll trust me." There was a long pause. The weight of the moment hung heavy in the air. Finally, the president nodded. "Do it," she said softly. "Whatever you're going to do, do it." And with that, Elias left the room. Outside, chaos reigned. Soldiers rushed past him, shouting orders and loading weapons. Civilians clogged the roads, trying to flee the cities. Above it all, the alien ships continued their slow descent, casting shadows over everything. Elias moved through the madness like a ghost. He didn't stop to explain himself or seek permission. Instead, he headed straight for an abandoned military base on the outskirts of town. There, hidden away in a dusty corner of the armory, was the only thing he needed, a battered rifle he'd carried for years. It wasn't fancy or high-tech. It didn't shoot lasers or explode on impact, but it was reliable. And reliability was something Elias valued above all else. As he slung the rifle over his shoulder, he caught sight of his reflection in a cracked mirror. The man staring back at him was older now, his hair streaked with gray, his body showing signs of wear and tear. But his eyes burned with determination. Whatever fear he might have felt was buried deep beneath layers of resolve. By the time Elias reached the edge of the city, the first wave of attacks had begun. Alien drones descended from the mothership, firing indiscriminately at anything that moved. Buildings crumbled, cars exploded, and bodies littered the streets. Through it all, Elias remained calm. He moved with purpose, dodging blasts and weaving between debris until he reached his destination. The base of the largest alien ship dotted towered above him, its surface shimmering like liquid metal. For a moment, Elias allowed himself to feel small. Then, he shook it off. Feeling small wouldn't help him now. Reaching into his pocket, he pulled out a small device, a relic from his days in Project Orion. Decades ago, he'd been part of a top-secret program designed to prepare humanity for encounters with extraterrestrial life. Most of his comrades had died during those missions, leaving Elias as one of the few survivors. Now, standing alone before an unstoppable enemy, he realized why fate had spared him. This was his moment. Activating the device, Elias sent a signal directly to the ship's communication system. Within seconds, a beam of light shot down from above, enveloping him. When the light faded, he found himself inside the alien vessel. Aliens surrounded him immediately, their elongated limbs and sharp features making them look more like predators than people. They barked commands in a language Elias didn't understand, though he guessed they were demanding answers. He ignored them, focusing instead on the task at hand. He spotted Commander Zernix almost instantly. The alien leader stood atop a raised platform, surveying the scene with obvious amusement. Seeing Elias, Zernix tilted his head, clearly intrigued. "So," Zernix said in halting English, "this is your strongest warrior?" Elias didn't respond. Instead, he reached behind his back and retrieved a small object, a beacon. Holding it aloft, he activated it, bathing the room in a soft glow. Data streams began to appear around him, holographic projections detailing the Vorthic's weaknesses, their tactics, their secrets. Zernix's amusement turned to anger. "What is this?" he demanded. Elias smiled faintly. "This," he said, "is your warning." At that moment, the skies outside grew darker still. Something new was approaching, something far greater than the Vorthic could have anticipated, and Elias knew his job was done. Elias Kane stood in the dimly lit room aboard the Vorthic mothership, his rifle slung over his shoulder and the beacon glowing softly in his hand. Around him, aliens buzzed with confusion and anger. Their sharp tongues clicked and hissed as they shouted orders at one another, trying to make sense of what was happening. Commander Zernix watched from his platform, his glowing red eyes narrowing as he studied Elias. For a moment, no one moved. The air felt heavy, charged with tension. Then Zernix stepped forward, descending from his perch with slow, deliberate steps. His towering frame loomed over Elias, but the old soldier didn't flinch. He stood straight, his face calm, almost serene. If anything, he looked bored. "You dare bring this thing into my ship?" Zernix growled, pointing a clawed finger at the beacon. "Do you think your little toy scares me?" Elias shrugged. "It should." The alien commander let out a harsh laugh that echoed through the chamber. "You humans are pathetic, weak. You cling to hope like it's some kind of shield, but shields break. Hope dies. And now, here you stand a single man against an empire. Tell me, human, do you truly believe you can stop us?" Elias didn't answer right away. Instead, he glanced around the room, taking in the faces of the Vorthic soldiers. Some sneered at him, others looked curious, and a few seemed uneasy. He could see it in their movements, the slight shifts in posture, the way their hands hovered near their weapons. They weren't afraid of him. They were afraid of what he represented. A challenge. An unknown factor. Something they couldn't control. Finally, Elias turned back to Zernix. "I'm not here to stop you," he said simply. "Not by myself, anyway." This response seemed to catch the alien leader off guard. For a brief second, Zernix hesitated, his expression flickering between curiosity and suspicion. "Then why are you here?" he demanded. "What is the purpose of this display?" Instead of answering directly, Elias activated the beacon fully. Holographic projections sprang to life around him, filling the room with swirling images and streams of data. Maps of the Vorthic fleet appeared, highlighting weak points in their defenses. Schematics of their ships revealed vulnerabilities in their energy shields. Even classified information about their home planet's secrets meant only for the highest-ranking officers was laid bare for all to see. The Vorthic soldiers gasped and muttered among themselves. Some backed away instinctively, while others raised their weapons, unsure whether to attack or retreat. Zernix's jaw tightened, his claws flexing as he processed what he was seeing. "Where did you get this?" he snapped, his voice rising. "Who gave you access to our systems?" Elias smirked, though there was no humor in it. "Let's just say I've been doing my homework." Zernix snarled, stepping closer until he was inches away from Elias. "You lie. No human could have obtained this knowledge. Not without help." Elias tilted his head slightly, studying the alien commander with cool detachment. "Maybe you're right. Maybe I had help. Or maybe—" He paused, letting the word hang in the air before continuing. "Maybe I survived long enough to learn these things on my own." At that, Zernix froze. His glowing eyes widened slightly, and for the first time since Elias entered the ship, he looked genuinely unsettled. "Survived?" he repeated slowly. "What do you mean?" Elias didn't respond immediately. Instead, he reached up and touched the scar running along his cheek, a reminder of battles fought and won. Then, in a quiet voice, he began to speak. "Years ago, your kind sent scouts to explore this galaxy. They found Earth, but they also found something else, a barren world on the edge of our solar system. A place where nothing grows, where the air is toxic, and the ground is covered in ash. They thought it was empty, useless, so they left behind a few experiments, weapons, tech, traps, and moved on." He paused, letting his words sink in. The room was silent now, every eye fixed on him. "I was part of a mission to investigate that world. We called it Project Orion. My team went in expecting danger, but we never imagined how deadly it would be. One by one, my comrades fell. Some to the environment, others to the traps your people left behind. By the time the dust settled, I was the only one left." Elias took a step forward, closing the gap between himself and Zernix. "But I didn't die. I adapted. I learned. I survived. And in surviving, I discovered secrets about your kind secrets that could destroy you." Zernix stared at him, his expression unreadable. For a moment, it seemed like he might lash out, strike Elias down where he stood. But then he laughed, a low, rumbling sound that sent shivers down the spines of everyone in the room. "You expect me to believe this nonsense?" he said, shaking his head. "Even if what you say is true, it changes nothing. Secrets are meaningless without power. And you human have none." Elias smiled faintly. "That's where you're wrong." Before Zernix could respond, the ship trembled violently. Alarms blared, and red lights flashed across the walls. The Vorthic soldiers scrambled to their stations, shouting orders and checking monitors. On one of the screens, a new image appeared, a fleet of ships emerging from hyperspace, far larger than anything the Vorthic had ever seen. "What is this?" Zernix roared, turning to his crew. "Report." One of the officers stammered. "Unknown vessels approaching, sir." They're massive." Elias crossed his arms, watching the chaos unfold with quiet satisfaction. "Like I said," he murmured, loud enough for Zernix to hear. "You should have been scared." The alien commander spun around, his face contorted with fury. "You did this," he accused, pointing a clawed finger at Elias. "You led them here." Elias shrugged again, unfazed by the accusation. All I did was send a signal. Seems like someone was listening. Zernix lunged toward him, grabbing him by the collar and lifting him off the ground. Up close, the alien's breath was hot and acrid, his teeth bared in a snarl. "Who are they?" he demanded. "What do they want?" Elias met his gaze without hesitation. "They're called the Sentinels, and they're here to clean up your mess." The alien commander released him, throwing him to the ground with a growl. "Sentinels? Those legends are myths. Stories told to frighten children." "Maybe," Elias replied, getting back to his feet. "Or maybe they're real. Either way, you'll find out soon enough." By now, the entire ship was in turmoil. Orders were being shouted in every direction as the Vortex scrambled to prepare for battle. But Elias knew it wouldn't matter. The Sentinels weren't like the Vortex, or like humanity, for that matter. They were something else entirely. Something ancient and unstoppable. As the first shots rang out in the distance, signaling the start of the fight, Elias turned and walked toward the exit. He didn't look back. He didn't need to. His job was done. All that was left was to watch the pieces fall into place. Behind him, Zernix barked commands, his voice tinged with desperation. "Prepare the fleet. We're leaving this system immediately." Elias stopped in the doorway, glancing over his shoulder. "Good luck with that," he said dryly. Then he disappeared into the corridor, leaving the Vortex to face their fate alone. Outside, the skies above Earth grew darker still. The Sentinel ships dwarfed even the largest Vortex vessels, their sleek designs gleaming ominously in the fading light. As they opened fire, beams of energy tore through the alien fleet, reducing once mighty ships to rubble in seconds. The Vortex tried to flee, but escape routes were cut off one by one. It was clear. This wasn't a battle. It was an execution. Back on Earth, people watched in awe as the tide turned. News outlets broadcast live footage of the alien fleet being decimated, their commentators struggling to comprehend what they were witnessing. In cities and towns across the globe, cheers erupted as hope began to return. Elias stood atop a hill overlooking the ruins of a nearby city, his rifle resting against his shoulder. The wind whipped around him, carrying the scent of smoke and ash. Below, survivors picked through the wreckage, searching for loved ones and salvaging what they could. Despite the destruction, there was a sense of resilience in the air, a determination to rebuild, to endure. As he gazed out at the horizon, Elias allowed himself a small smile. He hadn't saved the world. Not really. That credit belonged to the Sentinels. But he had done something important. He had reminded humanity that they were worth fighting for. That even in the face of overwhelming odds, courage and ingenuity could still shine through. The Vortex mothership was in chaos. Alarms blared, red lights flashed, and the once orderly ranks of alien soldiers had dissolved into frantic disorder. On the main bridge, Commander Zernix paced back and forth like a caged predator, his glowing red eyes darting between the screens, showing the destruction outside. The Sentinel ships loomed over the Vortex fleet, their sleek forms cutting through space with terrifying precision. Every shot they fired obliterated another alien vessel, leaving behind only clouds of debris. Zernix clenched his claws, his voice rising to a shout as he barked orders at his crew. "Divert all power to the shields. Activate emergency protocols. We are not dying here." But his commands fell on deaf ears. His officers scrambled to carry out his orders, but it was clear they were overwhelmed. The Sentinels' weapons were unlike anything that Vortex had ever encountered, beams of energy that sliced through their defenses as if they weren't even there. Ships exploded left and right, their crews screaming as they were consumed by fire and vacuum. Panic spread among the survivors, some abandoning their posts entirely in a futile attempt to escape. Amidst the chaos, Alias Kane stood quietly near the exit, observing everything with detached calm. He leaned casually against the wall, his rifle slung over his shoulder, his expression unreadable. To the Vorthik, he must have seemed almost amused by their predicament. In truth, he felt nothing, not triumph, not satisfaction, not even relief. This wasn't about him. It never had been. Commander Zernix finally noticed Elias again, his fury boiling over. Stomping toward the old soldier, he grabbed him by the collar and yanked him forward. "You!" he snarled, his sharp teeth inches from Elias's face. "This is your doing. You brought them here." Elias didn't resist. He simply stared back at the alien leader, his gaze steady. "I told you," he said evenly. "I'm not here to fight your war. I'm here to warn them." "Warn who?" Zernix spat. "Who are these? Sentinels? What do they want?" Elias shrugged as best he could while still being held by the throat. "Ask them yourself." Zernix growled, tightening his grip for a moment before shoving Elias away in disgust. "You humans are cowards," he sneered, "hiding behind legends and myths. You think this warning will save you? When the Sentinels are done with us, they'll turn on you next." For the first time since entering the ship, Elias's calm demeanor faltered. A flicker of doubt crossed his face, but it vanished almost instantly. He straightened his uniform, brushing imaginary dust off his shoulders. "Maybe," he admitted, "but I'm willing to take that chance." Zernix let out a harsh laugh. "Foolish. You would gamble the fate of your entire species on the mercy of strangers." Elias met his gaze without hesitation. "Better than surrendering to monsters like you." The alien commander's eyes narrowed, his claws flexing as though he wanted nothing more than to tear Elias apart. But before he could act, one of his officers interrupted, shouting urgently, "Commander, incoming transmission from the Sentinel flagship." Zernix hesitated, torn between confronting Elias and addressing the new threat. Finally, with a frustrated growl, he turned away. "Put it on screen," he ordered. A holographic image materialized above the central console, a towering figure clad in gleaming silver armor. Its features were humanoid, but unmistakably alien, with smooth, angular lines and glowing blue eyes that radiated authority. Behind it, rows of other Sentinels stood at attention, their presence commanding respect even through the projection. "This is Admiral Kale of the Sentinel Vanguard," the figure announced in a deep, resonant voice. "Your actions have violated galactic law. Cease hostilities immediately and prepare to surrender." Zernix bristled, his pride refusing to let him back down. "We are the Vorthik Empire," he roared. "We bow to no one." Admiral Kale tilted its head slightly, as though considering the statement. Then, without warning, the Sentinels opened fire again. A massive beam of energy struck the Vorthik mothership, shaking the entire structure violently. Lights flickered, and several consoles exploded, sending sparks flying across the room. Zernix stumbled, barely managing to stay upright. His officers shouted in panic, some diving for cover while others tried desperately to stabilize the ship. Through it all, Elias remained where he was, watching silently as the Vorthik's arrogance crumbled under the weight of superior force. When the shaking subsided, Zernix regained his footing, his face twisted with rage. "You dare attack us?" he screamed at the hologram. "Do you have any idea what you're dealing with?" Admiral Kale's response was cold and measured. "We are aware of your crimes, Commander Zernix. Your conquests, your enslavement of lesser species, your experiments on sentient beings, all recorded, all witnessed. The galaxy has tolerated your existence for too long. Today, that ends." Zernix clenched his fists, his body trembling with barely contained fury. "You cannot destroy us. We are eternal. We are His words were cut short as another blast rocked the ship, this one even stronger than the last. Sections of the ceiling collapsed, crushing equipment and trapping several aliens beneath the rubble. Smoke filled the air, making it hard to breathe. The remaining crew members scrambled to evacuate, abandoning their posts in favor of survival. Elias moved to the side, avoiding falling debris as he made his way toward the exit. He didn't need to see the rest. The outcome was inevitable. The Vorthok had underestimated their enemies one time too many, and now they were paying the price. As he reached the doorway, Zernix called after him, his voice tinged with desperation. "Where are you going, human? Are you just going to leave us to die?" Elias paused, glancing over his shoulder. "You should have thought of that before you came here," he replied. Then, without another word, he stepped into the corridor and disappeared from view. Outside, the battle raged on. The Sentinel ships continued their relentless assault, tearing through the Vorthok fleet with surgical precision. Alien vessels exploded in brilliant bursts of light, their wreckage drifting aimlessly through space. Escape pods launched in every direction, but few made it far before being intercepted and destroyed. It was a massacre, plain and simple. Back on Earth, people watched in stunned silence as the events unfolded. News outlets broadcast live footage of the alien armada being annihilated, their commentators struggling to find words to describe what they were witnessing. Some cheered, celebrating the sudden turn of fortune. Others prayed, hoping that the mysterious newcomers wouldn't turn their wrath on humanity next. In the midst of it all, Elias walked through the ruins of a nearby city. Fires still burned in the distance, casting an orange glow over the landscape. The streets were littered with debris, and the air smelled of smoke and ash. Survivors wandered aimlessly, searching for loved ones or simply trying to process what had happened. Despite the devastation, there was a sense of hope in the air. People helped each other, sharing food and water, tending to the wounded, and beginning the long process of rebuilding. For the first time in days, smiles returned to their faces. They had survived. Against all odds, they had endured. Elias climbed to the top of a crumbling building, surveying the scene below. From this vantage point, he could see both the destruction and the resilience of humanity. Families huddled together for warmth. Volunteers worked tirelessly to clear roads and rescue those trapped beneath rubble. Even amidst the ruins, life went on. He sighed softly, leaning on his rifle as he gazed out at the horizon. The Sentinel ships still dominated the sky, their presence a stark reminder of how close humanity had come to annihilation. Yet Elias couldn't help but feel a small measure of pride. He had done what he set out to do. He had proven to the universe and to himself that humanity was worth fighting for. Behind him, footsteps echoed on the broken concrete. Turning, he saw a young boy approaching cautiously, his wide eyes fixed on Elias's uniform. The child looked no older than 10, his clothes torn and dirty, but there was a spark of curiosity in his gaze. "Are you the one who stopped them?" the boy asked hesitantly. Elias shook his head. "No," he said simply. "I didn't stop them. I just gave someone else the tools to do it." The boy frowned, clearly confused. "But everyone says you're a hero." Elias chuckled softly, kneeling down to meet the boy's eye level. "Heroes are just people who do what needs to be done," he explained. "Sometimes that means standing up to giants. Other times, it means knowing when to step aside and let someone stronger take over." The boy nodded slowly, though it was clear he didn't fully understand. After a moment, he smiled shyly. "Thank you," he whispered. Elias ruffled the boy's hair affectionately. "Don't thank me. Thank the people who kept going when things looked hopeless. That's real courage." With that, he stood and turned back toward the edge of the building. Below, the survivors continued their work, united by a shared determination to rebuild. Above, The Sentinel ships hovered silently, their purpose fulfilled for now. Elias took a deep breath, savoring the cool night air. Whatever came next, humanity would face it together. And that, he realized, was the greatest victory of all. The sky above Earth was no longer dark. The massive alien ships that had once blocked out the sun were now gone, replaced by an eerie stillness. The Sentinel's fleet remained in orbit, their sleek vessels casting long shadows over the planet below. For humanity, the immediate threat was over, but the questions lingered. Who were these mysterious protectors? Why had they come? And most importantly, what would they do next? Elias Kane stood on the edge of a crumbling highway, watching as survivors worked together to clear the wreckage left behind by the Vorthic invasion. Trucks loaded with supplies rumbled past, their drivers honking horns in gratitude as volunteers waved them through. People shared food and water, patched up wounds, and began the slow process of rebuilding. Despite the destruction, there was a sense of unity in the air, a quiet determination to rise from the ashes. But Elias knew better than to let his guard down. He had seen enough battles to recognize the calm before the storm. The Sentinels might have saved Earth this time, but their intentions were far from clear. They weren't human, after all. Their logic, their motives, everything about them was alien. Humanity owed them a debt, but debts like that often came with strings attached. As he walked through the makeshift camp set up near the ruins of a city, Elias noticed how people looked at him. Some whispered behind their hands, pointing at his battered uniform and rifle. Others approached him directly, thanking him for what he had done, or at least what they believed he had done. To them, Elias Kane was a symbol of hope, proof that even in the face of overwhelming odds, one person could make a difference. He didn't correct them. What would he say? That he hadn't fought off the invaders? That he had only activated a beacon and trusted someone else to finish the job? No, it was easier to let them believe what they wanted. Heroes were good for morale, and right now, humanity needed all the morale it could get. Eventually, Elias found himself drawn to a small group gathered around a portable radio. Voices crackled through the static, broadcasting updates from global leaders and reports from scientists studying the Sentinel's technology. One voice stood out, a young journalist speaking live from a secure location somewhere in Europe. We're told that representatives from the Sentinel fleet have made contact with Earth's governments, the journalist said, her tone urgent but controlled. Details are scarce, but sources indicate that negotiations are underway. For now, the Sentinels appear to be holding position in orbit, observing our recovery efforts. Whether they plan to stay or leave remains unknown. The crowd around the radio murmured anxiously, some hopeful, others fearful. Elias listened silently, his arms crossed as he processed the information. Negotiations. That word carried weight. It meant the Sentinels weren't leaving anytime soon, and that humanity was walking a very thin line. High above the planet, aboard the Sentinel flagship, Admiral Kale stood in the command center, overseeing operations. Around it, rows of holographic displays showed real-time data streaming in from Earth's surface. Every movement of humanity's leaders, every decision made in response to the invasion, it was all being monitored and analyzed. Admiral, one of its subordinates said, stepping forward. Initial scans confirmed the Vorthic presence has been neutralized. No survivors detected within the designated quarantine zone. Kale nodded slowly, its glowing blue eyes fixed on the image of Earth displayed before it. Good. Ensure the cleanup is thorough. We cannot allow any remnants of their influence to remain. Yes, Admiral, the subordinate replied, bowing slightly before retreating to carry out the order. Alone for a moment, Kale turned its attention to another screen, one showing footage of Elias Kane. The old soldier moved among the survivors, helping where he could, though he seemed to avoid drawing too much attention to himself. Kale studied him carefully, noting the scars on his face, the weariness in his posture, and the quiet resolve in his actions. "He is interesting," Kale murmured to itself. "A relic of a forgotten age, yet instrumental in our intervention." A second figure entered the room, its armor adorned with markings signifying high rank. This was Commander Syra, Kale's second in command. Like Kale, Syra exuded an aura of authority, though its demeanor was colder, more calculating. "The human leaders have agreed to meet us," Syra reported. "They wish to discuss terms of cooperation." Kale tilted its head slightly. Cooperation, a dangerous concept when dealing with species such as theirs. Syra's expression didn't change. "Agreed. However, we must consider the potential benefits. Their adaptability and resourcefulness could prove useful in future engagements." Kale considered this for a moment, then gestured toward the screen showing Elias. "What of him? The one who triggered the beacon?" Syra glanced at the display. "His role was minor, yet his survival suggests resilience. Perhaps worth further observation." Kale nodded. "Very well. Prepare a delegation. We will meet with the humans and assess their value. But remember, Syra, their gratitude does not equal trust. They are fragile, unpredictable. Handle them accordingly." "As you command," Syra replied, bowing deeply before departing. Back on Earth, preparations for the meeting with the Sentinels were underway. World leaders convened in a secure facility deep underground, debating how best to approach the situation. Should they offer resources, technology, or simply plead for mercy? Opinions varied widely, but one thing was clear. Humanity's fate rested on this encounter. Elias wasn't invited to the meeting. Not officially, anyway. But when a black SUV pulled up outside the ruins where he'd been staying, he wasn't surprised. Two men in suits stepped out, their expressions grim as they approached him. "Colonel Kane?" one of them asked. Elias nodded. "That's me. We've been instructed to bring you to the summit. You're needed." He raised an eyebrow. "Needed for what?" "I'm just an old soldier." The man hesitated, glancing at his partner before answering. "You know things about them. About the Sentinels. Things no one else does. If this goes wrong, we might need your help." Elias sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. He had known this moment would come. Reluctantly, he grabbed his rifle and followed them into the vehicle. The ride was silent, save for the hum of the engine and the occasional crackle of the radio. When they arrived at the facility, Elias was led to a large conference room filled with monitors and communication equipment. On one of the screens, the image of Admiral Kale appeared, flanked by several other Sentinels. The meeting began awkwardly, with both sides struggling to bridge the gap between their vastly different cultures. Human translators worked tirelessly to interpret the Sentinels' formal language, while the aliens observed the proceedings with clinical detachment. At first, the discussion focused on technicalities, how the Vorthek had violated galactic law, why the Sentinels had intervened, and what steps would be taken to prevent similar incidents in the future. But as the conversation progressed, tensions began to rise. The humans grew defensive, wary of being judged or controlled by their supposed saviors. The Sentinels, in turn, expressed concern over humanity's tendency toward violence and self-destruction. It was during this tense exchange that Elias finally spoke up. Stepping forward, he addressed the screen directly. "You saved us," he said, his voice steady. "We owe you for that. But you should know something about humans: we don't give up easily. Even when things look hopeless, we keep fighting. That's who we are." Admiral Kale regarded him curiously. "And what purpose does this fighting serve?" "Destruction breeds only more destruction." Elias shook his head. "Not always. Sometimes it leads to growth, to learning, to becoming stronger. You saw that yourself when you answered my signal. You saw that we were worth saving." For a long moment, Kale was silent. Then it spoke, its voice softer than before. "Perhaps. But strength without wisdom is fleeting. Will you use this second chance wisely, or will you repeat the mistakes of the past?" Elias didn't have an answer, not one he could put into words, anyway. Instead, he simply nodded. "We'll try." That's all anyone can do. The meeting ended shortly afterward, with both sides agreeing to maintain open communication. The Sentinels promised to monitor Earth's progress, while humanity vowed to work toward peace and stability. Whether either side truly trusted the other remained to be seen. As Elias left the facility, he felt a mix of emotions: relief, uncertainty, and a strange sense of pride. Humanity had been given a lifeline, however fragile it might be. Now, it was up to them to make the most of it. Standing under the stars, he looked up at the Sentinel ships still hovering in orbit. Whatever happened next, one thing was certain: the road ahead wouldn't be easy. But then again, nothing worth fighting for ever was. Weeks had passed since the meeting with the Sentinels, and life on Earth was slowly returning to a semblance of normalcy. The scars of the Vorthic invasion were still visible: ruined cities, empty streets, and fields littered with debris. But humanity had begun the long process of healing. People worked tirelessly to rebuild homes, businesses, and communities. Hope was in the air, fragile but alive. Elias Kane wandered through the countryside, far from the bustling activity of the cities. He preferred solitude these days, finding comfort in the quiet rhythm of nature. The rolling hills stretched out before him, dotted with wildflowers and tall grass swaying gently in the breeze. It was peaceful here, untouched by war or destruction. For the first time in years, Elias felt a sense of calm. He carried his rifle slung over his shoulder, though he doubted he'd need it anymore. Still, old habits died hard. The weapon had been with him through countless battles, a constant companion in times of chaos. Now, it served as a reminder of where he'd been and how far he'd come. As he walked, Elias thought about everything that had happened. The Vorthic invasion, the arrival of the Sentinels, the negotiations. He had played a part in all of it, however small. But now, his role was done. Humanity didn't need him anymore. They had their protectors in the sky, their leaders working to ensure peace, and their own resilience to guide them forward. Elias was just an old soldier, a relic of a different time. A sound broke the silence, a faint rustling in the bushes nearby. Elias stopped, his hand instinctively reaching for his rifle. But instead of danger, a young boy emerged, no older than 10. His clothes were patched and worn, but his face was bright with curiosity. He held a stick in one hand, pretending it was a sword, and pointed it at Elias like a challenge. "Are you really him?" the boy asked, his voice brimming with excitement. "The guy who fought off the aliens?" Elias chuckled softly, lowering his hand. "Not exactly," he replied. "I didn't fight them off. I just gave someone else the chance to do it." The boy frowned, tilting his head. "But everyone says you're a hero." Elias knelt down so they were eye level. "Heroes are just people who do what needs to be done," he explained. "Sometimes that means standing up to giants. Other times, it means knowing when to step aside and let someone stronger take over." The boy nodded slowly, though it was clear he didn't fully understand. After a moment, he smiled shyly. "Thank you," he whispered. "For what?" Elias asked, raising an eyebrow. "For saving us," the boy said simply. Elias ruffled the boy's hair affectionately. "Don't thank me. Thank the people who kept going when things looked hopeless. That's real courage." The boy grinned, then turned and ran back toward the village, waving over his shoulder as he disappeared into the distance. Elias watched him go, a small smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. Maybe there was hope after all. Later that evening, Elias found himself atop a hill overlooking a newly rebuilt town. Lights twinkled in the windows below, and the faint sound of laughter drifted up on the wind. People gathered around campfires, sharing stories and singing songs. Children played in the streets, their laughter ringing out like music. It was a scene of renewal, of life pushing forward despite everything it had endured. Elias sat cross-legged on the ground, gazing out at the horizon. Above, the sentinel ships still hung in the sky, their presence both comforting and unsettling. He wondered how long they would stay, whether they truly intended to protect Earth or if they had other plans. For now, though, their watchful eyes brought a measure of security. And perhaps that was enough thought behind him. Footsteps crunched softly on the dry grass. Turning, Elias saw a familiar figure approaching, an elderly woman carrying a basket filled with bread and fruit. It was Mrs. Hargrove, one of the few people who knew Elias's true identity. She had taken him in briefly after the invasion, offering food and shelter without asking questions. In return, he had helped repair her roof and tend to her garden. "You shouldn't be out here alone," she scolded gently, setting the basket down beside him. "You'll catch your death of cold." "I've survived worse," Elias said with a wry smile. Mrs. Hargrove rolled her eyes, but couldn't hide a grin. "That's what you always say. Here, eat something. You look like you haven't had a proper meal in days." Elias accepted a piece of bread, tearing off a chunk and chewing slowly. The warmth of the fresh-baked loaf spread through him, grounding him in the present moment. For someone who had spent most of his life fighting battles, this simple act of sharing food felt almost surreal. "You know," Mrs. Hargrove said after a while, "the kids talk about you all the time. They think you're some kind of legend." Elias snorted. "Legends belong in stories, not real life." She shook her head firmly. "Nonsense. Legends are just ordinary people who did extraordinary things. Like you." He glanced at her sideways, unsure how to respond. Instead, he focused on the horizon again, watching as the last rays of sunlight faded into darkness. Stars began to appear, one by one, until the entire sky was ablaze with light. "They're beautiful, aren't they?" Mrs. Hargrove murmured, following his gaze. "Makes you wonder what else is out there." "It does," Elias agreed quietly. "And it makes you realize how small we are, but also how strong," she added. "We may be tiny compared to the universe, but we've got something they don't hope. Determination, the will to keep going, no matter what." Elias nodded, a thoughtful expression crossing his face. "Maybe that's why the Sentinel saved us. Not because we're special, but because we refuse to give up." Mrs. Hargrove patted his shoulder affectionately. "Well, whatever the reason, I'm glad they did. And I'm glad you were here to help." Elias didn't reply. He didn't need to. The two of them sat in companionable silence, enjoying the cool night air and the distant hum of life below as the weeks turned into months. The Sentinels gradually withdrew their fleet, leaving behind automated drones to monitor Earth's progress. Their departure was met with mixed emotions: relief that they weren't staying permanently, but also anxiety about facing the future alone. Yet humanity proved resilient once more, determined to prove themselves worthy of the second chance they'd been given. Elias continued to drift from place to place, never staying too long in one spot. He became a wandering figure, a ghost of the past who appeared when needed and vanished just as quickly. Some claimed to have seen him helping farmers repair fences or teaching children how to shoot straight. Others swore he was nothing more than a myth, a story told to inspire hope. In truth, Elias preferred it that way. He didn't seek recognition or glory. He had done what he set out to do, and now it was time to fade into the background. Humanity didn't need heroes anymore, they needed each other. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Elias stood on a cliff overlooking the ocean. Waves crashed against the rocks below, sending sprays of water high into the air. The salty breeze tugged at his coat, and the sound of seagulls echoed in the distance. It was a place of endings and beginnings. Reaching into his pocket, Elias pulled out the beacon he had used to summon the sentinels. Its surface was scratched and worn, its glow dimmed from years of use. He held it for a moment, remembering everything it represented: the sacrifices, the victories, the lives saved. Then, with a final glance at the horizon, he tossed it into the sea. It sank quickly, disappearing beneath the waves forever. Whatever purpose it had served was over. There was no need for warnings now. Turning away, Elias walked back toward the path leading inland. His boots crunched softly on the gravel, and his shadow stretched long in the fading light. Ahead lay uncertainty, challenges yet unknown, but also possibilities. Humanity had proven itself capable of greatness. Now, it was up to them to shape their destiny. As Elias disappeared into the twilight, his figure grew smaller and smaller until it blended with the landscape. To those who saw him, he was just another traveler passing through. But to those who knew his story, he was something more, a reminder that even in the darkest times, courage and hope could light the way forward. And sometimes that was enough.